Real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. Tonight we're diving into 9 chilling encounters that will blur the line between reality and nightmare. From a monstrous New Year's Eve sighting to a skinwalker lurking in the New Mexico desert, these stories will remind us that we may not always be alone in the dark. First up, a girl's boyfriend encounters a terrifying creature on New Year's Eve while driving home in southeast Kentucky.
This story isn't a joke. Trust me, I thought it was at first too. My boyfriend saw something he can't explain. It was New Year's Eve and he was driving home after our date night, so it was around 1 a.m. We live in southeast Kentucky. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I got a call from him. I didn't think anything of it, assuming he was calling because he was bored on his drive home or something. I answered, kind of half asleep, when he told me he just saw something terrifying and he didn't know what to do. He said,
"Listen, I know this sounds insane, and I can't tell anyone else because no one will believe me, but I'm scared."
You should know that my boyfriend does not get scared often. He's rational. He views everything through a rational lens. He doesn't believe in the paranormal. I thought he was just messing with me, or he was trying to scare me or something. I told him to explain what happened.
"I was driving down the interstate and saw a deer, but it wasn't. It was huge. At first, I thought it was just a really big deer, but as I got closer, I realized deer don't get that big. Elk don't even get that big."
It was at this point that I realized he was telling the truth. His voice was shaking and he was talking frantically. I've never heard him that scared before.
"It was hunched over. It looked like a really big man, but it had deer antlers and fur all over it. I thought I was tweaking until I looked in my rearview mirror after I drove past it, and it was still there, and other cars were swerving away from it."
That night, he didn't sleep. He kept a loaded gun by his bed and watched the security cameras around his house all night. Last night, we were talking about it again. As he was talking, his eyes were darting around, and he would check behind us every 30 seconds or so. He gave me a better description of it. It stood about 8 feet tall and looked like a man hunched over with his hands on the ground. It had a human face and massive deer antlers. Standing upright, it probably would have been about 12 feet tall. It was covered in fur and stood deer-like. It was standing on the side of the interstate, just watching the cars go by. Here is where things get wild. His house is about a mile from the interstate with some woods separating them. He's explored these woods before. He was telling me about a bridge in the woods that he'd explored before, and it shouldn't technically be there. Every bridge in the state of Kentucky is registered with a serial number. This one wasn't. He described it like it looked brand new. There was no rust, the stone and metal were pristine, and there was no graffiti. Under the bridge, there was a tunnel. This tunnel would logically be a drainage tunnel, but it was always bone dry. He doesn't know how long it is, but he knows it is at least 2 miles long. He said it has been a couple of years since he's been there, and he doesn't want to go back. He thinks that the thing he saw is from there. He said bridges are supposed to be registered, but it isn't in the Kentucky registry. Everything about the bridge is just wrong, and something about it reminded him of the thing he saw on the interstate. He told me there's only been one other experience in his life that was like this one. It was right when he turned 17, and he was out alone hunting in the woods. If you've never been hunting before, you can see the woods wake up around you. As the sun rises, the birds wake up, the squirrels come out and run around, and the deer come out for dinner, since they're nocturnal. He told me this time that nothing was there. The birds weren't chirping, there was nothing in sight. The leaves were still, there was no wind, and everything was dead silent except the sound of his own breath. It was around noon, and he decided something was off and left to go home. He told me he didn't think much of it then, but now it genuinely scares him to think of that day. Has anyone ever seen anything like this before? I don't know if it was a Wendigo or someone pulling a prank, but I know I've never heard my boyfriend sound like that before. I believe him. I believe there was something there that night that is unexplainable, and I need someone to confirm we aren't crazy. I need some sort of explanation.
Next, while driving home late one night in the deserts of New Mexico, a teacher encounters a strange, dark mass that absorbed his car's headlights like a black hole.
This happened between Crown Point, New Mexico, and Borrego Pass on Navajo Tribal Road 48. I'm a non-Native American who has lived and worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation as a school teacher on several different occasions. The most recent gig was from November 1997 to June 2000. As a lifelong resident of New Mexico, I have driven hundreds of thousands of miles, with tens of thousands of those miles at night. I consider myself a very experienced nighttime driver, as I have seen almost every type of mammal and animal, both wild and domestic, that New Mexico has. I've seen deer, elk, cattle, horses, sheep, dogs, cats, rabbits, mountain lions, badgers, skunks, porcupines, etc., while driving at night. I recognize them all. When I first started working at Borrego Pass Elementary School in 1997, I was making a home visit to one of my students. His name was Billy. Not really his name. Billy was a brilliant boy with a higher-than-average IQ. He told me on that visit that their neighbor a mile away was a skinwalker. I scoffed at Billy and said something like, "There's no such thing." But Billy insisted, saying that the neighbor changed into an animal and came to their house and looked into the windows. This was all very interesting to me, but I pretty much forgot about what he said. Around 1998, I started teaching night classes at Dine College in Crown Point, teaching astronomy. The class would end around 10 p.m., and I would head back home to Borrego Pass, 18 miles to the east. One night after class, about 10:15 p.m., sometime in the spring, April or May of 2000, I was driving my 1998 Ford Escort on Navajo Tribal Road 48. I drove about 50 miles per hour because of the possibility of horses and livestock in the roadway. I always noted Billy's house off the road at about the halfway point to my home. It was one of my waypoints. It was about this time that suddenly something weird passed from right to left in front of my car's headlights. This was the strangest creature or object I've ever encountered on the road. It was a large, shapeless hole that did not reflect any light whatsoever. My car's headlights simply disappeared and were swallowed into the darkness of this mass. I saw no definite shape, no legs, no head, no eyes, just a shapeless black hole. I've never seen anything quite like it before or since, but whatever it was gave me the creeps. I remember getting scared and speeding up. I pushed the car's speed up to 65 miles per hour and got to my little duplex at Borrego Pass. I got into the apartment as quickly as I could and locked the door behind me. I then sat in the living room, trying to figure out what I saw. The next day, I told one of my Navajo friends what I saw. His jaw dropped. He immediately said it was a skinwalker, but I had nothing to worry about since they can't harm white men. Still, it was weird. I have told this story to several Navajos, and they have all pretty much come to the same conclusion that it was a skinwalker. Weird stuff for sure. A logical explanation says it was a black dog or black bear, but it's more fun to think of it as a skinwalker. I'd like to know what others think it might have been.
Coming up, a woman recounts a story told to her about a friend that had a terrifying encounter with a humanoid creature on a quiet rural road in Red Bluff, California.
I I'm telling this story secondhand on the behalf of the friend who experienced it. He recounted the time when he was a teenager living in Red Bluff, California. He had a girlfriend who lived within walking distance of his home, and he used to sneak out and head to her house in the middle of the night. He recalled how the road he would walk to her place spanned a rural distance before reaching her neighborhood. On this occasion, he was making his way back home early in the morning. At a particular section, the road passed through a long, dark stretch of rural land, only to be momentarily lit by the infrequent passing of car headlights. But being that it was really early in the morning, there were few cars on the road. It was dark and quiet as he walked when he noticed the sound of footsteps following behind him on the gravel. He was immediately uncomfortable, looked behind him and couldn't see anything in the darkness. It was not uncommon for drugged-up derelicts and transients to be wandering around at this time of night around this area. These were characters you would certainly not want anything to do with at this time of night, or any time really. He increased his pace, yet the footsteps seemed to remain just as assuredly behind him as before. His discomfort began to elevate to panic. Suddenly, a car was heading toward him on the desolate road. He knew as the headlights passed, he would have a chance to see who was following him. The moment came, and he turned to see what this crackhead wandering in the night might look like. But what he saw was nothing of the sort. He explained to me what he could only describe as looking like a large Great Dane walking upright on its hind legs. He said it looked like the creature had a snout, some sort of huge mangy dog standing on its hind legs. The skin looked gray, pale, and hairless, and it was very skinny to the point where you could see its skeleton underneath. The most memorable detail he kept recalling, though, was the way in which its ribcage protruded, just like that of a Great Dane or other large dog. What he saw terrified him, and he started sprinting and didn't stop until he reached the nearest lit area he could find, which was a random parking lot. He stood there terrified until the sun came up, walked the rest of the way home, and never went down that road at night again. Does anyone know what it could have been that he saw? This isn't far from where Bigfoot was seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film, but this doesn't sound like a Bigfoot sighting at all.
Next up is not only a mysterious encounter, but one that I hope is also uplifting for anyone that may need it. Not every encounter has to be a terrifying one. I hope you enjoy this story.
At one time, several years ago, I was utterly despondent. I had planned to jump off a bridge near where I live. I was dead set on ending life. I was just out of energy and love. I had no more life to give, if that makes any sense. It was right before Christmas, and it was snowing. I stopped at a hotel near the bridge to mooch off their Wi-Fi to finish my farewell note. I was just about done when my battery died. Perfect. I checked into a room to charge my laptop. As I was waiting, I began to get hungry. I felt burdened by the hunger, more annoyed than anything, so I decided to get something to eat. This hotel was located in a small town, and the only restaurant was right next door. I went over, and there was a closed sign on the door, but the lights were on, and I could hear people inside, so I went in. A gray-haired man came out of the back and told me that he and the employees were having a Christmas party, but their chef could whip something up. I go into the main dining room and wait around a while before getting up to grab myself a beer. This big African-American guy comes out from the kitchen and asks me what I want to eat. I tell him that a burger and fries would do, or whatever is easiest for him. I go sit down in a booth. Anyhow, he comes out from the kitchen with a burger, fries, another beer, and one for himself. He promptly sits down and joins me. My thoughts for my farewell note are promptly pushed away, as I become annoyed by his presence. He begins talking to me, telling me about his life. Just filling silence, you know? Then he tells me that what I am about to do is a big mistake. If I don't care about living, why not do exactly what made me happy? Why not do all of the things I had been meaning to do but put off for work, for solving other people's problems? He said a lot of other things too, some of which felt like he knew me and felt a bit foreboding, but in a good way, like somehow he knew that I would overcome all this suffering and lead a good life. By the end of the conversation, I was too exhausted to finish my note. I decided to finish it in the morning. When I woke up, I decided to give myself 1 year. Just 1 year to try everything that man suggested. I decided to really truly do everything I could to be happy, to really give my all to do the things I had been putting off. I decided to walk next door and see if I could find him, or at least leave him a note. When I walked in, no one knew what I was talking about. There was no Christmas party. No black gentleman had ever worked there, and they closed at 5 p.m. the evening before due to the weather. I walked away stunned, but I couldn't really say surprised. The whole evening seemed surreal. To this day, I have no idea who that man was. I only know that I owe him my life. The changes that I made that year after I met him eventually led to me meeting my husband and having my son. We stopped there on a summer road trip this past year, and I cried when I realized how close I came to ending my life. I can't imagine not knowing my husband or my son. I think of that man often, and I call him my angel. Frankly, I don't care if he is or not, but he will always be the angel that saved my life. I hope someday I can pass it on.
This story hit me and is probably an encounter that often goes probably pretty unnoticed when it happens. They may not always be mysterious in nature like this experience, but maybe people come into our lives at specific times to help right the course, so to speak, if we're open to it. But sometimes, like in this next story, it's your intuition, that little voice in your head that tells you what you need to do. Where listening to it may save your life, ignoring it may end it.
Remembering these words still sends a chill up my spine. This was a few years ago. My husband and I were getting gas late one night. This was a bit of a weird gas station, where two roads intersected at an angle, with the gas station being on the acute angle, if you can picture that. At the pump we chose, there were no working lights, and it was difficult to see directly from either road. We were driving a soft-top Jeep Wrangler with all of the rear windows taken off. My husband got out to pump, and I was sitting in the passenger seat looking at my phone. That's when I heard it.
I'm not going to hurt you.
A wavery voice said some distance behind me. I froze, suddenly terrified. I turned around to look out the empty space where our back window used to be, and saw what appeared to be a homeless man a little ways off. He had slightly wild gray hair, a washed-out beanie, and an oversized jacket with lots of pockets that hid his hands. I suddenly realized how dark it was and how hard it was for anyone to see us. And I couldn't see his hands. I had a distinct feeling from deep down, so prominent I could almost hear it. Run! But we're just pumping gas, and he's just a weird homeless dude. My husband and I were from Key West. We had seen plenty of them before, and they were almost all harmless. So I slowly turned back around and went back to my phone. Yet I still heard him. The distinct sound of shuffling feet. The rustle of his jacket.
I'm not going to hurt you,
he said again.
I just need some help. Do you have any money? I'm not going to hurt you.
At this point, I could tell he was almost at the Jeep. We had only been there a couple of minutes, and we'd been on almost empty. There was no way the tank was full. Without warning, my husband rushed into the car and hurried to start the engine. I could tell his hands were shaking. He managed to throw the car into drive, and we peeled out of there. I looked behind us and saw the man standing there, not reacting, next to the dangling nozzle my husband hadn't bothered hanging back up. As we turned out of the gas station, my husband said, I just had the most horrible feeling. Something in me just told me to run. I looked at him in horror and told him I'd felt the same thing. I felt tears come to my eyes as I thanked him for listening to his instincts. We went home feeling quite shaken, just going over the events we had just seen and the fear we had felt. It was a day or two later that we watched a YouTube video by a security analyst, Scott Stewart, on the Kenyan mall shooting. He said that in every event like this, there are people who said, right before it happened, I had a terrible feeling that something bad was about to happen. He adds that some people listen to that feeling and leave the area, while others mention how much they regret not listening to it. I burst into tears hearing this, knowing the feeling he had described all too well. I had had that feeling and was one of those who ignored it. I remember scream crying, "Thank you," at my husband for listening to his sense of danger. Now, it is fully possible this was just a harmless person asking for money in a slightly creepy way, and that nothing bad would have happened. But I can't stop remembering how the weird angles kept anyone from seeing us. I can't stop thinking about how dark it was, and I can't stop thinking about his hidden hands, and I still get full body chills remembering him say,
I'm not going to hurt you.
Moral of the story, I guess, if you ever get that distinct feeling that something bad is imminent, leave the area. It may be a false alarm, but it's better than going through the rest of your life wishing you had listened to that feeling.
Next, while living in rural California, a man experiences a chilling, human-like shrieking that echoes from every direction.
I live in the middle of nowhere, Siskiyou County, California, with a track record of cryptid and paranormal activity. However, I've never expected to have any personal experiences. Last night, 9/27/2024, at about 11 p.m., I heard the most horrifying shrieking sound outside of the house. The strangest part was the sound wasn't coming from any one direction. It was like surround sound, the way it was coming from every angle. It sounded almost human, and every dog within our radius was going crazy. We live rurally, and it's not uncommon to hear foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions at night. When we hear them, typically the neighbors' dogs from whatever direction the sound came from go nuts for a few minutes, and then the peaceful quiet resumes. That was not the case last night. The dogs from the neighbors on the left, right, and behind us were going insane, barking and howling, and even making loud whining sounds. I feel the need to add each neighbor is about a half to 1 mile away as well. The shrieking continued several times, and each time it was that surrounding sound, not coming from any identifiable direction. Aside from the shrieking and the dogs, it was silent outside. No insects, no birds, nothing. I had this sense of dread in the pit of my stomach and felt like something was watching me from outside. I've never experienced anything like it in our time living out here. We're about an hour north of Mount Shasta, and I know there are a lot of weird things associated with the area. It was such a bone-chilling experience, and I'm honestly a bit nervous for nightfall tonight. One really interesting thing was that I started praying. Fervently. As soon as I did, all the creepy noises stopped. The shrieking and the barking all went quiet, and the insects and birds started back up. It was so bizarre. I don't have any idea where the shrieking may have been coming from. I feel silly, but I just can't shake the experience and figured if you would have any ideas what it could be.
Oh man, I've heard a lot of shrieking throughout the night while out in the wilderness. Some people I've talked to say it's mountain lions fighting, owls, bobcats, or even foxes. I've even seen a fully naked person run through my camp late one night on my van's outside security cameras that provoked an early morning search and an eventual missing person report at a local police department. Honestly, no telling what kind of crazy you'll encounter late at night, but shrieking, the kind of shrieking in this story, well, it'll definitely send shivers down your spine and make you question venturing out alone at night. Coming up, a hunter experienced a strange silence in the woods and encountered something unexplainable.
I once held a hunting lease in Middle Georgia. It was an abandoned hunting camp that hadn't been used in several years. I'm not superstitious at all, but this place was legitimately spooky. It was miles down an overgrown dirt road and completely surrounded by woods. It's probably the most secluded place I've ever been. I used to hunt there by myself a lot, and there was always this weird sense that I wasn't alone out there. There was a locked gate at the front of the property, but it was not uncommon for us to find the front door of the cabin open, even when the door was locked. That was pretty creepy, but that's not what this story is about. One evening, I was hunting down in a small valley by a food plot we put lining a creek that bordered the property. From the minute I sat down, I had a weird feeling, like I wasn't in a safe place even though I was holding a .308 with ballistic-tipped rounds. I didn't feel like I was the top predator out there. I didn't see any deer while I was sitting in the stand, but the forest was abuzz with activity. Birds, squirrels, and other critters were singing their normal evening symphony, and then, all of a sudden, silence. Everything just stopped, and it felt like everything in the woods was looking right at me. It was getting dark fast anyway, and I was extremely creeped out, so I packed up my gear and started the walk back up to the cabin. About 100 yards away, I had this feeling that something was coming up behind me. I spun around and pointed my rifle back down the path towards the food plot, and that's when I saw it. There was something standing in the middle of the path. It wasn't a person, but it didn't look completely like a deer, or anything I've seen before. There was hardly any light to make out any features to be certain outside of antlers and relative shape, but it looked like some kind of bipedal deer or something standing, wearing a deer head. It was just standing there, staring at me, but it was definitely what I heard approaching me from behind. I quickly made my way back to the cabin, walking most of the way back backward, packed up my stuff and got out of there. I just let the lease run out and never went back after that ever again, and don't plan to.
Next, two friends come across a tall, white creature in rural Texas.
I was hanging out with my best friend when she was living with her parents out in a rural community in Victoria County, Texas. She and her dad had told me some stories in the past of odd occurrences in the neighborhood, but I hadn't actually seen anything in their area myself. I will say I have seen and heard plenty of strange things happen in and around Victoria County, as well as nearby counties, but never this. That particular night, my friend and I were bored and decided to go into town to hit up a bar. To describe her neighborhood, picture one main road that makes a big loop all the way from one section of a highway to another section of the same highway. Off one side of this road was a very large cornfield and a couple farmhouses. And off the other side were the two long main roads of my friend's neighborhood. Those two main roads had one short road connecting them about halfway down, then another short road going between them again at the very end, almost like a boxy digital 8, but the top line keeps going in both directions. She lived at the very end of one of the longer roads. We got into her car and we started driving up her road. She began telling me some story or some gossip from work. I don't remember. The topic of conversation isn't important, just that she was talking at the time. I'm sort of half listening and staring blankly out through the windshield. We had gotten to just about, or maybe a little past the halfway point, when I saw her headlights illuminate this thing walking across her road, up where it ends at the main road that connects to the highway. It was very tall, impossibly skinny, pale, and grayish. For reference of how it moved, picture or look up that scene from Signs. When they showed the birthday party footage on the news, but it was a little faster, more fluid, and the arms and legs were longer. I got instant chills as it passed in front of us. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but just as I told myself that, I heard my friend say, "What the fuck was that?" and realized she had stopped telling her story and that she had brought her car to a full stop as well. She stepped on the gas, and we got up to the main road as fast as we could, but when we got up there, neither of us could see anything in either direction, as it was too dark with no streetlight, and her headlights only showed the crop in front of us. We were both a little shaken up, and ended up not trying to pursue it, and just sticking to the plan and heading to town. But I remember being terrified leaving her house later to go home. Neither of us ever saw it again. I haven't heard any stories since about similar sightings in my area. I don't know what I thought it was at the time, but after doing some research, could it have been a Palecrawler or an alien like in the movies?
Our final story of the evening is one that begs the question, are werewolves real?
This experience is one I never shared with anyone besides my brother. When I was about 13 years old, I was living in rural British Columbia. One night, I was in the hot tub on the deck outside, just staring into the woods, taking in the silence. It was wintertime, and we had just recently had a snowfall that left around knee-height deep of snow. It was around 2 to 3 a.m., and out of nowhere, this very, very large wolf, bigger than any I had ever seen, came out of the woods. I remember its coat being a shimmering silver with snow and its bright, piercing green eyes. As this wolf was walking along the fence line of our paddocks, it locked eyes with mine, and we stared at each other as it walked past me. We were both alone in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. What happened next, to this day, instantly makes my spine shiver. As the wolf walked past, it moved toward our barn, where our horses were. The barn had a bright light illuminating the outside entrance, which I could clearly see. This wolf, as it started to enter the barn, transformed from the shape of a wolf to a very large, broad-shouldered man. The horses didn't make a single sound, and this man, who now stood roughly 7 feet tall, walked through the barn, rounded the corner, and walked out towards the open field. I never saw him again. My brother had his own encounter with what I'm guessing was the same wolf. He told me that he woke up randomly one night with the feeling of being watched. He then looked out his window to see a very large wolf walking away. I'm guessing it was watching him sleep. This place we lived at was old native ground. Our barn was an old schoolhouse where the Catholic priest would put the native children and teach them lessons on Christ. It even had the old desks and chairs inside still. My brother and I both saw children's faces in the panes of glass from that barn, and lights would turn on randomly. We had closet doors slam repeatedly for minutes at a time, footsteps, and feelings of being watched. In my room, I saw glowing red eyes on the ceiling and hid under my covers until morning. Anyways, my main subject and what I'm more seeking answers for is, what did I encounter outside in the middle of the night? After I did some research myself, the closest thing I could find was skinwalkers or wendigos. But from what I read, these creatures have deformed features or things that make them uncanny or straight up horrific. What I saw, nothing struck me as abnormal about this wolf besides its massive size and the fact that it literally changed its entire form into a man in front of me. I know this is long-winded, sorry, I'm not a great storyteller. But the wolf incident is just something I've never really been able to grasp. I've always wanted some kind of answer because I know it sounds unbelievable. Are werewolves real?
That is a wild story. I've spent a lot of time in the Midwest where stories of Dogman sightings are prevalent. Either thousands of eyewitnesses are delusional, or there really is something stalking the cornfields of the Midwest, looking very much like what we know to be a werewolf. That's all for tonight, dear listeners. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.